Welcome to the program. I'm Jeff Schechtman. We're often critical of how we look at current events without the full context of history. It's a criticism often leveled at the young, and it's a criticism that's often justified. However, sometimes the opposite is true. We know too much about history, to the point where we look at sui generis events today through the lens of our lived or historical experience, which may actually prevent us from seeing, reacting to, and acting upon events in their own context. Not because of something that happened, but because of something that happened before. When looking at the world of the CIA, spycraft, and espionage, it's fair to say that the images of both World War II and particularly the Cold War shape our vision. Is this helpful? Does it allow us to understand, better or worse, the world of 21st century covert action and government secrecy? Joining me to explore this is my guest, David Ignatius. As he has done in 9 previous CIA novels, Washington Post Global Affairs columnist David Ignatius takes us inside the world of the modern-day CIA and contemporary spycraft. It is my pleasure to welcome Washington Post columnist David Ignatius back to this program. David, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Jeff. Thank you.
It's great to have you here. Talk a little bit about this sense that we all have of spycraft, and most of it sort of grew up during the Cold War, and how that gives us a sort of particular set of notions as we think about spies and the CIA and espionage today.
Well, I think the models are so powerful. We all grew up reading the John le Carré novels, the classic Cold War battle between Soviet intelligence, Karla, the Russian spy master, Moscow Center. We imagine this ballet played out. You remember in the le Carré novels, they talk about the pavement artists who are doing surveillance. And it became clear to me a few novels ago, this, as you said, is my 10th, that all of the traditional themes of espionage and the spy novel had gone digital. That all the things a spy agency does, try to penetrate the adversary, try to manipulate and deceive, try to use covert action to disable the adversary, those were all now a matter of digital technology. Recruiting as your mole, the head of another intelligence service, as in a le Carré novel, made less sense than recruiting the systems administrator who ran the basic networks. You'd get access to all the secrets without having all the fuss of having to recruit the top guys. So that's the world that we live in. I try to write realistic spy novels, and so I began to take my fiction into these issues, that the people who do the technical side of the intelligence business, as the third novel in which that's been my focus.
Mm-hmm. How does this digital world and the way spycraft plays out in this world sort of reflect, if it does at all, the kind of moral twilight that was part of how we saw spycraft and human intelligence during the Cold War?
Well, in part because of writers like John le Carré, we did tend to see intelligence as a world of gray. I don't think it was quite as gray as some of the novelists suggest. I mean, the Soviet Union, in my judgment, was an evil empire. It was a repressive dictatorship. It kept nationalities in Eastern Europe under basically a iron fist. There were good guys, or at least there were certainly bad guys. Whether we were always the good guys is a more complicated question. But I think the world that we're living in now is infinitely complicated in part because the information space that we all live in is now a domain of war, and certainly of spy wars. There is now a constant low-level war going on. It's not a full shooting war, but going on in cyberspace. We saw that in our 2016 presidential election, documented in great detail in the Mueller report. The Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee just reaffirmed that Russian activity was malicious, intense, So that's the terrain in which we now conduct our politics. Our business life is, I think, similarly vulnerable to manipulation. And there's a whole new chapter that's just about to start, and that's really the subject of my new novel, The Paladin. We're going to move from fake news, which was really what the 2016 Russian operations were about, to fake events, to video and sound imagery that can be created by computers that is so exquisitely packaged that it's almost impossible to detect. And I think that is going to present, for intelligence agencies, how do we know that something is true? How do we, information that we get, how do we analyze it, tell the president, tell policymakers what to do if we're not sure about its provenance, about whether it's really true?
Talk about the skill set, then, that espionage and those that practice it, people in the CIA, have to bring to their work. Talk about it in the context of Michael Dunn, who is at the center of your story.
So Michael Dunn is one of those blue-collar CIA guys. He's a tech. He is not one of the fancy case officers who ends up being a station chief. He's the guy who, creates and then plants the bugs, the microphones, all the devices of Spycraft. And Michael Dunn is a loyal servant of the agency. In the beginning of the book, he is ordered asked to do something, I should say, because he's not specifically ordered, that he suspects may be illegal, but he does it anyway because that's the kind of loyal officer he is. And over the course of the book, he gets caught, he gets indicted, convicted, sent to prison. He's hung out to dry by his colleagues in the agency for reasons he doesn't understand. So he is a foot soldier in this war, a victim of it in ways that the book unravels for the reader. I think we don't value the men and women who were CIA or FBI officers on the ground as much as we should. Every time we see a soldier in uniform in a public place, people thank you for your service. Sometimes people just burst into applause when we go to a ball game. We don't have that same feeling for intelligence officers like the hero of this novel, and we ought to. I mean, they and diplomats are risking their lives in really nasty places. But it's just not our instinct to feel that to thank them for their service.
Of course, some of that comes out of the fact that they have to operate in the shadows most of the time.
They do, and they should. This is a secret service. But I think, I hear in the critiques of President Trump about the deep state. I hear in the critiques of liberals similarly about CIA rogue operations, a fundamental mistrust. You can understand why when you look at the history of the CIA. They've made a lot of mistakes. But I've said often in my columns, Jeff, that we're going to end up with the intelligence service that we deserve if we don't make people feel that they're doing a job that's valued, that the country respects them, stands behind them. Over time, I think that the performance of the intelligence agencies will decline. I've seen that, to be honest, in the R. 10 novels. Each of them is a snapshot of where the CIA is. And I've seen some diminution of their operational capabilities, self-confidence, performance.
What changed, if anything, in the post-9/11 era in terms of how we see the CIA with respect to the kinds of things you're talking about, David?
Well, I think the most important thing that happened is that the CIA was transformed from an espionage organization trying to identify and then steal secrets that could keep us alive to a counterterrorism organization. It was given the mission of tracking down Al Qaeda. It ended up using what I think we now all are just horrified by, the torture methods like waterboarding, because the country was frightened and people wanted to know, were there going to be dirty bombs on our subways. The CIA officers were told that the Justice Department Office of Legal Counsel had authorized them to do certain things. I think as we look back, we would say they should have said no anyway. But they were told that it's okay, it's legal. And they became a killing machine from the air. The drone programs to shoot down al-Qaeda terrorists in the Fatah, the tribal areas of Pakistan, were CIA operations. So they, again, did what presidents asked them to do and what the country felt it wanted. They ended up being a very different organization, way lopsided on the counterterrorism side, as it's happened in the military too. For the CIA, I think this really is a time to go back to basics, to go back to focusing on the secrets that we need to know. I'd love to see a much smaller CIA that didn't worry about every issue around the globe, but worried about the things that actually are dangerous to the country. I think CIA it's so big and bureaucratic, it sometimes gets in its own way. But your basic question, how did it change after 9/11? It changed a lot. And as the counterterrorism problem recedes, as I think it has, I hope they'll get back to basics.
One of the other things that you deal with in the Paladin is this nexus with respect to journalism, to journalists, and it circles back to what you were talking about before in terms of these deep fakes that might be part of the future.
So my hero, Michael Dunn, is assigned by the Director of Operations to penetrate a nominally journalistic organization based in Europe run by an American that is doing exotic and increasingly manipulative things in the information space. And the CIA operations director wants to get inside of it. Is it a journalistic organization? It's like the question we face with WikiLeaks. Is that like a newspaper? In the case of my novel, the organization that Dunn is penetrating is called Fallen Empire. Is a step or two beyond anything WikiLeaks would ever do. And WikiLeaks, to my knowledge, doesn't publish false information. It publishes things people might wish that they didn't put out. Hillary Clinton's emails or other things that they're provided to them by the Russians or this one or that one, but they're not fakes. In the case of Fallen Empire, they have advanced the technology of information and information manipulation to the point that they're putting out almost undetectable false information, video of an oil spill from a tanker that never happened, that's been concocted in a studio. Similar inflammatory things. The person who's running this organization begins the book as a kind of idealistic young man. He imagines himself as a social bandit plaguing the rich corporations and powerful people on behalf of the ordinary folks. He comes to believe that mission is fundamentally misguided. He's being manipulated by others, and so he ends up, as he realizes he destroyed the life of Michael Dunn, the CIA officer who was sent to penetrate his organization, feels a deep sense of regret. And again, that's one of the engines that drives the book forward, is his understanding that what he was doing, well, he called it journalism, was not, was manipulative and wrong.
Talk about the dangers that are inherent in journalism getting caught up in this kind of warfare, essentially, this deep fake warfare. and the way in which it's so easy for it to be misrepresented and for journalists to be taken in by it sometimes, even well-meaning and hardworking.
So we have to be suspicious of every piece of information, in quotation marks, that comes our way. That's always been true. Everything comes at a reporter with some spin on it, and we need to understand what it is. In the current situation where information that's shown to you, tape that's played for you, could be fabricated, we need to be more in the habit of, as I would put it, interrogating the facts. How do we know something is true? How do we know that a certain fact? How did it arise? What's its origin story? What other facts, in quotation marks, is it hung around with? And I think journalists have to do this. We, at the Washington Post, have a feature now that's one of the most important things we do, called the fact checker, where Glenn Kessler, my colleague, awards 4 Pinocchios. If it's a real whopper, you get 4 Pinocchios. A lot of news organizations now realize they're in the fact-checking business. The CIA is thinking a lot about how it's going to be sure that the information that it gets from all of its sources and sensors is real. How does it check? What are the forensics of fact-checking for an intelligence agency? And I guess I'd say, most of all, we as consumers of information need to really work hard to make sure that what we're getting is true. I mean, people just need to be more conscious of the possibility that their information ecosystem has been polluted. Some people don't seem to care. They seem to kind of like being in the club and beating the drum and seeing information as a weapon. InfoWars is one of the right-wing groups, but seeing information as a weapon in a larger war. I think that's just super dangerous, and people need to exercise good information hygiene, if you will, to keep that flow pure. And I'll just say one more thing, Jeff. So in a world where it's so easy to create false information and manipulate people, the value of having true information is going to increase. People will pay more money to have information that they have confidence is accurate. I mean, if you're a financial trader or have any kind of business, you need to know that the information you're making decisions on is right, that hasn't been manipulated, cooked by your competitors or by other people. So you'll pay a lot to be sure that it's accurate. The people who you trust to provide you information that's reliable will over time, I think, get stronger. I hope so. And that's one way out. It's just basic market incentive. The desire for good information will drive out the purveyors of lies.
Have you seen any evidence that the leaders of intelligence agencies today, be they the CIA or any of the other intelligence agencies, that the leadership, many of whom came up in another era, really understand the scope of what we're talking about today? It kind of reminds me of when some of the Silicon Valley executives went before a Senate and House committee not too long ago, and the questions clearly reflected people that didn't understand what was happening in the world of technology.
So it's a great question, and I'm not 100% sure of the answer. I know that there's some senior officers at the CIA and in the military who get it, who are technologically sophisticated, wouldn't ask the questions you heard the congressional committee members asking Zuckerberg and others. Do they have the power to drive us in the right direction toward better better AI systems, better information management, a better focus on cybersecurity, at the cost maybe of having fewer aircraft carriers, having less exquisite fighter jets, because you got to get the money for the information and cyber operations from somewhere. That I'm less sure of. I'm actually writing a column today about this dilemma as it's going to face Congress and Pentagon planners. But there are people certainly who get it. The CIA created a new Directorate of Digital Innovation, which was run by some very sophisticated people who would give anybody in Silicon Valley a run for their money. The problem is that these are bureaucracies, and worse, they're secret bureaucracies. And so all the inertia that you see in any bureaucracy, people want to keep doing what they know how to do, what they did yesterday, is compounded, I think, in the secret world. And sometimes they get stuck. And that's one reason it's fun to write a novel about these issues, because you think maybe it's just going to poke a stick. So people say, hey, this really does matter. We ought to think about this more.
The other danger, I suppose, is that because the barriers to entry, like so many other areas of technology, because the barriers to entry are lower and less expensive in many cases, that in a globalized world, the danger of enemies having access to so much of this is so much greater than it was in other areas and other eras, I should say, of spycraft and intelligence.
Hacking talents are pretty randomly distributed around the world. You've got smart hackers in Iran, North Korea, it turns out, certainly in China, all over the world. Young kids who love to play with computers, write code, or learning how to do these things, and the tools, amazingly, frighteningly, have been disseminated on the internet. You remember the days when even the simplest outline of how to make a nuclear weapon the Progressive magazine was brought to court to prevent it from publishing that. These days, the most sophisticated tools for penetrating computer systems, taking down the electrical grid, go down the list. Those are all out on the internet. You can buy rootkit access tools easily, and so I think the adversary has these weapons available. Attribution, knowing who's doing something to you, is obviously very difficult. The one thing that I am certain of is that the CIA is working very hard to think about how to evaluate, test information so that they know its reliability. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Agency, has had a project for several years in what they call media forensics, which is to develop techniques so that Facebook or Google or the government has a better chance of detecting something that's a deliberate fake before it poisons the well.
And where does human intelligence fit into the equation today?
Well, the problem, I think, is speed. Human intelligence has a subtlety, we would say, intuition. Computers still, even the most advanced AI systems, have trouble, telling a joke or getting a joke. I mean, irony, all the subtle things that human beings do that help us make judgments, help us evaluate people. The AI is still some distance from being able to do that. The problem is that these AI systems, autonomous weapon systems driven by AI, move at speeds that it's really increasingly impossible for humans to be in that decision loop. So, we now have hypersonic weapons that go at many times the speed of sound, that can vary their course as they travel. The response to those weapons, deciding what to do, how to shoot them down, I fear those are going to have to be made by AI algorithms, because there's just not time for a human being to get in the decision loop. And there's a lot of thinking going on at the Pentagon. They're trying to draw in the smartest people in Silicon Valley to think about, so what are ethical AI rules? Because human beings are going to have to be in the design, because they may not be in the actual loop, but they have to be in the design. They have to think, what are going to be the algorithmic rules that decide how these systems act. All of the leading universities in computer science last year met with a team from the Pentagon that was organized by Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, to try to think about ethical AI. So I think that's, one, just to close out this idea, one thing that I really hope people in the technology world of Silicon Valley and, maybe have their country places in Napa Valley where you are, one thing I think they'll hope they'll try to do is help the government. We need our best minds thinking about problems of intelligence, of defense, to avoid the kind of conflict with China, where China has its best brains mobilized to limit our influence or hurt us, and we just don't have our best brains because they said, I don't want to work with the U.S. government. That would really it worries me. I think it should concern everybody.
And of course, the overlay to that in the few minutes that we have left is the danger and the degree to which all of this has become politicized today, and how it makes it all so much more difficult when, as you've pointed out, it's already difficult already.
Well, somehow we need to come out of this period of COVID-19 lockdown with some new ideas about how to structure things. A couple that are obvious to me. We need better hygiene in every way, how we interact face to face, but how we interact with information. We need better information hygiene so we know what's coming to us is clean. We need to come out of this period valuing the experts who are going to keep us safe, the epidemiologists who tell us who's sick and how's it spreading, the laboratory scientists who are going to design the vaccines and therapies that will help us really mark an end to this. And if we're not smart enough as a country to get those basics after this period that we're living through, but then I really worry. I pray that that's not so. I can't imagine that people would be so short-sighted they wouldn't say, "Oh, I really learned." I may not like the elite; those guys may, but we sure need smart scientists. If that doesn't happen, we have a long-term problem. I don't know how you solve it.
David Ignatius, his 10th CIA thriller just out is The Paladin. David, I thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Great conversation. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.